The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and Nari stepped into the most famous academy in the galaxy. Station Kepler 7 stretched out before her like a metal city floating in space. Bright lights lined the corridors, and tall windows showed the stars beyond. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that she was here, her stomach felt tight with worry. Other students moved past her without looking. They were tall, short, scaled, furry, and some seemed to glow with their own light. Nari had studied all the different alien species, but seeing them in person was different. She felt very small and very alone. A blue-skinned creature with 4 arms bumped into her without saying sorry. 2 insect-like beings clicked at each other in their language, their many eyes looking at Nari like she was something dirty. A group of tall, gray aliens with long necks whispered among themselves, pointing at her with their thin fingers. Nari pulled her bag closer and walked toward the main hall. Earth had fought hard to get her this chance. She was the first human ever accepted to the Galactic Academy. The peace treaty between Earth and the alien governments made this possible, but she knew many aliens did not want humans here. The main hall was huge, with a ceiling that seemed to reach up forever. Hundreds of students sat at floating desks arranged in perfect rows. At the front, a large screen showed images of space battles and star maps. Professor Volani stood at the center, his reptilian face calm and serious. Professor Volani was a Vorthak, one of the most respected species in the galaxy. His green scales caught the light as he moved, and his yellow eyes missed nothing. He had been teaching strategic combat theory for over 200 years. Students said he could predict battle outcomes just by looking at ship formations. Nari found an empty seat near the middle and sat down quietly. She opened her tablet and waited for class to begin. Around her, other students talked in low voices about their homeworlds and their families in the military. "Attention, students," Professor Volani's voice cut through the noise. His words were clear and cold. "Today we begin a new term and we have a new addition to our class." All eyes turned to Nari. She felt her face grow hot as hundreds of alien students stared at her. Some looked curious, others looked annoyed, and a few looked disgusted. "As part of the recent treaty agreements, we now have our first human student," Professor Volani continued. "Miss Nari from the planet Earth." Nobody clapped. Nobody welcomed her. The silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. "Now we must arrange seating according to proper academic protocol," the professor said. "Students will be seated based on their species' contribution to galactic civilization and their demonstrated academic merit." Nari watched as students began moving to different seats. The tall, elegant Nexari beings floated to seats in the second row. Their bodies seemed to be made of pure energy, and they glowed with soft light. They had created the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The Kalani insectoids moved to the third row with quick, precise movements. Their hive minds could solve complex problems in seconds. Behind them, the furry Gorvek took their seats in the fourth row. They were known as the best soldiers in the galaxy. More species filled the rows behind them. Each group knew exactly where they belonged. Nari remained in her seat, unsure where she should go. "Miss Lee," Professor Volani's voice made her jump. "You will take a seat in the last row." Nari looked back. The last row was far from the front, almost at the very back of the huge hall. A few maintenance robots sat there, quietly charging their batteries. She gathered her things and walked past all the other students. Their eyes followed her every step. The walk to the back felt like it took forever. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet hall. When she reached the last row, she sat down next to a cleaning robot that did not even notice her. "The front 3 rows will remain empty," Professor Volani announced. "Those seats are reserved for species that have earned their place through thousands of years of civilized advancement. Perhaps one day other species will prove themselves worthy of sitting there." Nari stared at the empty front rows. The best seats in the class, closest to the professor, sat vacant while she was placed in the very back. The message was clear. Humans were at the bottom of galactic society. "Today we will study the Battle of Vorthak Prime," Professor Volani began. "This engagement took place 400 years ago and represents one of the finest examples of strategic thinking in galactic history." The large screen came alive with images of spaceships and battle formations. Nari watched carefully, taking notes on her tablet. Despite sitting so far back, she tried to learn everything she could. The professor showed how the Vorthak fleet had defeated a much larger enemy force using patience and careful planning. Notice how they waited for the perfect moment to strike, he explained. This is the difference between civilized strategic thinking and primitive aggressive behavior. A Nexari student raised a glowing hand. Professor, what about the enemy's psychological state during the waiting period? Excellent question. Professor Volani smiled, showing his sharp teeth. The enemy became frustrated and made mistakes. This is why patience is superior to aggression. Nari raised her hand, but the professor did not see her. She raised it higher, but still no response. Finally, she cleared her throat softly. Yes, Miss Lee? Professor Volani's voice sounded tired, like he was annoyed. I was wondering about the supply lines during the waiting period. How did both fleets maintain their resources while positioning for advantage? The professor's yellow eyes narrowed. Miss Lee, humans lack the cognitive architecture to understand multi-dimensional warfare. Your species thinks only in simple terms: attack or retreat, win or lose. These deeper strategic concepts are beyond your current understanding. Laughter rippled through the classroom. Not loud laughter, but quiet chuckles that made Nari's face burn with shame. Perhaps you should focus on taking notes rather than asking questions above your level, Professor Volani added. Nari sank lower in her seat. The cleaning robot next to her beeped softly and rolled away, leaving her completely alone in the last row. For the rest of the class, she stayed quiet and wrote down everything the professor said. She studied the battle formations and tried to understand the tactics, but in the back of her mind a small voice whispered that maybe the professor was right. Maybe humans really were not smart enough for this place. When class ended, the other students filed out quickly. None of them looked at Nari or spoke to her. She packed her things slowly, waiting for the hall to empty before she stood up. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the 3 empty rows at the front. The seats looked comfortable and important. She wondered if any human would ever earn the right to sit there. Professor Volani was erasing the battle diagrams from the screen. He glanced at her as she passed. Miss Lee, he said quietly, I hope you understand that your placement reflects reality, not cruelty. Humans are new to galactic society. You have much to learn before you can contribute meaningfully to discussions of advanced warfare. Nari nodded politely, though inside she felt angry and hurt. I understand, Professor. Good. Work hard, stay quiet, and perhaps you will absorb some knowledge during your time here. As Nari left the classroom, she made a silent promise to herself. She would work harder than any other student. She would prove that humans belonged here. And somehow, someday, she would earn a seat in those front rows. But first, she had to survive being alone in the last row, surrounded by aliens who saw her as nothing more than a primitive curiosity from a backward world. The long corridor stretched ahead of her, leading to her small dormitory room where she would spend another lonely night on Station Kepler 7. Tomorrow would bring another day of sitting in the back, another day of being ignored, another day of trying to prove her worth to a galaxy that had already decided humans had none. She walked forward anyway, her footsteps steady and determined, carrying the hopes of an entire planet on her shoulders. 3 weeks had passed since Nari first sat in the last row of Professor Volani's classroom. Every day brought the same routine. She would enter the hall, walk past the empty front rows, and take her place next to the maintenance robots. Every day she watched other students ignore her existence. The cleaning robot had become her only companion. It would roll up beside her, beep softly, and sit quietly during lectures. Sometimes Nari wondered if the robot was the only being on the station that did not judge her for being human. Her assignments came back with red marks covering every page. Where other students received grades like excellent strategic thinking or shows deep understanding, Nari's papers were marked with comments like too simplistic and lacks sophisticated analysis. Even when she wrote the same answers as students sitting in front of her, her grade was always lower. During lunch, she sat alone in the cafeteria. The food machine served meals designed for different alien species. Humans could eat most of it, but everything tasted strange and left her stomach feeling upset. She missed the simple food from Earth, but mostly she missed talking to someone who understood her. In the dormitory, her room was small and cold. The walls were gray metal, and the single window showed only black space and distant stars. At night, she would lie on the narrow bed and wonder if coming here had been a mistake. Earth had spent so much money and effort to get her this chance, but every day made her feel more worthless. Professor Villani seemed to take special pleasure in making her feel stupid. When she raised her hand to ask questions, he would sigh loudly before answering. When she tried to participate in class discussions, he would cut her off and move on to other students. When she submitted homework, he would read it with a frown and shake his head sadly. Humans think in straight lines, he told the class during a lecture about space warfare. They see point A and point B, and they want to go directly between them. Advanced species understand that sometimes you must go to point C, then D, then back to B, and finally to A. This is why human military history is so primitive. The other students nodded and took notes. Nari wrote down his words too, even though they made her angry. She had studied human military history, and she knew it was more complex than Professor Villani claimed. But arguing with him would only make things worse. The turning point came during the 4th week of classes. Professor Villani announced that they would study the most famous battle in galactic history, the Battle of Vorthak Prime. The entire front wall of the classroom became a 3-dimensional display showing spaceships, planets, and star systems. This battle established Vorthak's superiority in strategic thinking, Professor Villani said with pride. Watch carefully as I show you how intelligence defeats brute force. The simulation began. Nari watched as 2 fleets approached each other near a red planet. The Vorthak ships were smaller and fewer, but they moved with careful precision. Their enemies had more ships and bigger weapons, but they charged forward without thinking. The enemy made the classic mistake, Professor Villani explained. They assumed that more ships meant certain victory. They did not consider the psychological aspects of warfare. Nari leaned forward in her seat. Something about the enemy fleet's behavior seemed familiar, but she could not place what it was. She watched as the simulation continued. The Vorthak commander waited patiently as the enemy ships came closer. Just when it looked like the enemy would win, the Vorthak ships suddenly split apart and attacked from multiple directions. The enemy fleet, caught by surprise, was destroyed within minutes. Beautiful, breathed a Nexari student in the 2nd row. Her energy body glowed brighter with excitement. Notice the timing, Professor Villani continued. The Vorthak commander waited until the enemy was committed to their attack. At that point, the enemy could not change course or adapt their strategy. This is what we call psychological warfare. Nari studied the battle formation more carefully. The enemy ships moved in tight groups, supporting each other but also limiting their options. When the Vorthak split their forces, the enemy tried to respond but moved too slowly. Their own formation worked against them. The enemy's psychology is the key, Professor Villani said. They believed in direct confrontation because their species was naturally aggressive. The Vorthak understood this weakness and exploited it perfectly. A Kalani student clicked his mandibles together, which was how his species showed agreement. The hive mind approach would have prevented this error. Individual thinking creates predictable patterns. Precisely, Professor Villani nodded. Species that rely on individual decision-making are easily manipulated by those who think collectively. Nari raised her hand slowly. She had noticed something important about the battle, but she was afraid to speak. The professor saw her hand, and his expression showed annoyance. What is it, Miss Lee? Professor, I was looking at the enemy formation and something seemed strange about their behavior. Oh? And what insight does human analysis provide? Some students chuckled quietly. Nari felt her face grow warm, but she continued anyway. The enemy ships moved like they were following a specific plan, but it was not their own plan. They were copying tactics from somewhere else. Look at how they grouped their ships and how they approached the target. It matches the formation patterns you showed us last week from the Battle of Kalani 7. Professor Villani's eyes narrowed. Miss Lee, you are seeing patterns that do not exist. This is typical human behavior. Your species looks for simple explanations for complex events. But Professor, if you compare the formations, enough. Professor Villani's voice was sharp. Miss Lee, humans lack the cognitive architecture to understand multidimensional warfare. Your species thinks only in crude binaries: attack or retreat, win or lose. These enemy commanders were not copying old tactics. They were simply inferior strategists who fell victim to superior Vorthak intelligence. The classroom fell silent. Nari felt all eyes on her, and most of those looks were not friendly. She had challenged the professor's explanation and everyone knew it. Perhaps, Professor Villani continued more quietly, you should focus on learning established facts rather than creating wild theories. Your homework assignment for tonight is to write a 5-page analysis of why the Vorthak victory was inevitable based on species psychology. Yes, Professor, Nari said quietly, sinking back into her seat. The rest of the class passed in uncomfortable silence. When the lesson ended, students filed out quickly, whispering to each other in their native languages. Nari remained in her seat until the room was empty except for the cleaning robot, which beeped at her sympathetically. That evening, alone in her room, Nari worked on her assignment. But she could not stop thinking about what she had seen in the battle simulation. The enemy tactics really did look familiar. She pulled up her notes from previous lessons and compared the formations. Her tablet chimed softly with an incoming message. The sender's name was Kim Hyun, and the message was marked with Earth's military encryption codes. Nari's heart raced as she opened it. Nari, I hope you are safe and learning well at the Academy. I cannot say much in this message, but I wanted you to know that we are proud of you on Earth. Your reports about the Academy lessons have been very helpful for our research department. Keep studying those battle simulations carefully. Sometimes old battles teach us about new threats. Stay strong, and remember that you represent all of humanity. We believe in you. Nari read the message 3 times before it automatically deleted itself. Kim Hyun worked for Earth's intelligence service, and he was telling her that her observations mattered. Someone back home was listening to what she learned at the Academy. She looked at her homework assignment again. Professor Villani wanted her to explain why Vorthak victory was inevitable. But what if it was not inevitable at all? What if the enemy had made specific mistakes that could have been avoided? More importantly, what if those same mistakes were still being made somewhere in the galaxy? Nari began typing her assignment, but now she had a different purpose. She would write what Professor Villani wanted to hear, but she would also keep her own notes about what she really observed. If Earth's intelligence service was interested in the Academy's lessons, then maybe her human perspective was not as worthless as everyone claimed. Outside her window, the stars looked different now. They no longer seemed cold and distant. They looked like destinations, like places where battles might be fought and where human thinking might make a difference. She was still stuck in the last row, still ignored and dismissed by her classmates and professor. But for the first time since arriving at the Academy, Nari felt like she had a real purpose. She was not just learning about galactic warfare. She was gathering intelligence that might help protect Earth. The cleaning robot rolled past her door, beeping its usual goodnight greeting. Nari smiled and waved at it. Tomorrow she would sit in the back row again, but now she had a reason to pay very close attention to every lesson. Professor Villani thought humans could only think in simple terms, but he was wrong. Nari was learning to think like a spy, an analyst, and a guardian of her species. The last row was becoming the most important seat in the classroom, even if no one else knew it yet. 2 months had passed since Nari first noticed something strange about the Battle of Vorthak Prime. Every night she studied the battle simulations shown in class, comparing them with notes she kept hidden in her room. What she discovered made her stomach feel cold with fear. The patterns were everywhere once she knew how to look for them. The Battle of Kalani 7 used tactics that looked exactly like ancient human strategies from Earth's history. The famous Nexari victory at Spiral Station matched formations that human generals had used thousands of years ago. Even the Gorvek conquest of the Outer Rim followed patterns that reminded her of military campaigns she had studied back home. But these aliens had never heard of Earth until recently. How could their greatest victories use human tactics? Nari sat in her small room looking at pages of notes spread across her desk. Each battle simulation from Professor Villani's class was there, drawn out in simple diagrams. Next to them were sketches of famous battles from human history that she remembered from her studies on Earth. The Battle of Vorthak Prime looked almost identical to the Battle of Cannae, where the human general Hannibal had surrounded a larger Roman army. The Nexari victory at Spiral Station used the same deception tactics that the Chinese strategist Sun Tzu had written about. The Gorvek conquest followed the rapid movement patterns that the American General Patton had used in World War II. Someone had been watching human military history and teaching it to alien species. But who? And why were they now showing these tactics to students at the Galactic Academy? Nari's tablet chimed with another encrypted message from Kim Hyun. Her hands shook as she opened it. Nari, your observations about tactical similarities are more important than you know. Keep watching for patterns, but be very careful who you talk to. Something is moving in the dark spaces between star systems. We need to know everything the Academy is teaching about warfare. Trust no one except yourself. The message disappeared after she read it twice. Nari stared at the empty screen, feeling more alone than ever. Something dangerous was happening, and she was the only one who could see it. The next day in class, Professor Villani announced a special lesson. Today we will study the most devastating military campaign in galactic history, he said. The Devourer Wars from the Andromeda Galaxy. The classroom display showed images of strange, dark ships attacking peaceful worlds. The ships were unlike anything Nari had seen before. They seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it, and they moved in formations that looked wrong somehow. The Devourers appeared without warning 50 years ago in our neighbor galaxy, Professor Villani explained. They conquered 12 civilizations in 6 months. Their tactics were perfect, their timing was flawless, and their strategies were impossible to counter. A Vorthak student raised his scaled hand. How did they develop such advanced warfare techniques? That is the mystery, Professor Villani replied. Intelligence reports suggest they studied each civilization they attacked. They learned their enemies' tactics and then used improved versions against them. Nari felt ice in her veins. The Devourers had learned their enemies' tactics, just like someone had learned human tactics and taught them to galactic species. What happened to the Devourers after they conquered Andromeda? Asked a Nexari student. They vanished, Professor Villani said quietly. Some think they destroyed themselves in civil war. Others believe they found new hunting grounds. But that was 50 years ago. They are not our concern today. But Nari was very concerned. She studied the images of devourer ships and their attack patterns. They moved like predators who had studied their prey for a long time before striking. During lunch break, she ate quickly and went to the Academy's computer library. Using her student access codes, she searched for more information about the Devourers. What she found made her hands tremble. The Devourers had not just conquered civilizations. They had absorbed them. Their ships contained technology from dozens of different species. Their tactics combined the best strategies from every enemy they had defeated. They were not just conquerors. They were collectors who took the knowledge and skills of entire civilizations. More frightening was what she found in the deep files. The Devourers had not vanished 50 years ago. There had been sightings of their ships in empty space moving between galaxies. Intelligence services across the known universe had been tracking them, but no one knew where they were going. Until now. Nari found a classified report that made her blood feel cold. Long-range sensors had detected Devourer ships moving toward the edge of their galaxy. The ships were still years away, but they were coming. That evening, Professor Villani held a special study session for advanced students. Nari was not invited, but she hid outside the classroom and listened through the slightly open door. The tactical simulations we study are not just history lessons, she heard Professor Villani tell the select group of students. They represent the greatest strategic thinking our galaxy has produced. Each battle simulation contains tactics that took centuries to develop and perfect. Why are we studying them so intensively? Asked a student. Because knowledge is power, Professor Villani replied. The species that understand these tactics will lead the galaxy's future. Those who cannot comprehend advanced warfare will be left behind. Nari heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly hid around the corner. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Everything was becoming clear now. The Academy was not just teaching military history. It was creating a library of the galaxy's best tactical knowledge. Every battle simulation, every strategy discussion, every lesson was being recorded and stored. But what if the Devourers could access those records? What if they were already learning everything the Academy taught? Late that night, Nari sent a coded message to Kim Hyun using the emergency communication system. The enemy is coming. They have been studying us for decades. Every tactic the galaxy knows, they know better. We need strategies they have never seen. 3 days passed before she received a reply. Understand your concern. Earth's military leaders are meeting to discuss the situation. Keep learning everything you can. Your position at the Academy may be humanity's only advantage. Nari realized what Kim Hyun meant. She was the only human at the Academy, the only person whose species had been ignored and dismissed by galactic civilization. The Devourers had studied every advanced species in the galaxy, but they had never bothered to learn about primitive humans. The next morning, she entered Professor Villani's classroom with new purpose. She walked past the empty front rows and took her seat in the last row next to the cleaning robot. But now she understood something important. Her position in the back was not punishment. It was camouflage. The Devourers knew everything about Vorthak strategy, Nixari technology, Kelani coordination, and Gorvek military doctrine. They had studied every species that sat in the front rows of galactic society, but they knew nothing about the species that sat in the last row. Professor Villani began his lesson about the Battle of the Seven Suns, another famous galactic victory. Nari listened carefully and took notes, but now she was looking for different patterns. She was not trying to learn alien tactics anymore. She was looking for their weaknesses. The cleaning robot beeped softly beside her, and Nari reached over to pat its metal surface. Even the robots were more respected than humans at this academy. But that invisibility might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. As Professor Villani praised the sophisticated thinking of advanced species, Nari smiled quietly to herself. The most advanced species in the galaxy were about to face an enemy that knew all their secrets. But the primitive species in the last row still had a few surprises left to share. The alarm systems throughout Station Kepler 7 screamed with a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. Nari woke from deep sleep as red emergency lights flashed in her small room. The station's communication system crackled to life with panicked voices speaking in dozens of alien languages. All students report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Nari pulled on her clothes and ran into the corridor. Other students were stumbling out of their rooms looking confused and frightened. The Nexari students glowed brighter when they were scared, filling the hallway with nervous light. The Vorthak students moved with quick military precision, but their yellow eyes showed worry. Even the confident Gorvek looked uncertain. The main hall was full of chaos. Hundreds of students crowded around the large display screens watching news reports from across the galaxy. What Nari saw made her feel sick with fear. Dark ships filled the screens, ships that absorbed light and moved like hungry shadows. The Devourers had arrived, and they were attacking everywhere at once. The Vorthak home system is under attack, announced a news reporter whose voice shook with terror. Admiral Thek's fleet engaged the enemy using our best strategic formations, but the Devourers anticipated every move. The fleet was destroyed in less than an hour. Another screen showed the Kelani homeworld surrounded by enemy ships. The hive mind coordination that has protected our people for thousands of years proved useless. The enemy knew exactly how we would respond to each threat. Professor Villani stood at the front of the crowd, his usual calm completely gone. His green scales had turned pale, and his hands shook as he watched the reports. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Our tactics are perfect. Our strategies have been proven over centuries of warfare. An XRE student floated forward, her energy body flickering with panic. Professor, how do they know our formation so well? They are countering every standard tactical approach. Before Professor Villani could answer, a new report flashed on the screens. The Gorvek military, famous throughout the galaxy for their fierce fighting skills, had suffered a complete defeat. Their enemies had used the Gorvek's own aggressive nature against them, leading them into perfect traps. 12 star systems have fallen in 6 hours, the reporter continued. The enemy appears to have complete knowledge of our military doctrine. They are not just winning battles. They are destroying our fleet so completely that no survivors remain to report on enemy tactics. Nari pushed through the crowd until she could see Professor Villani clearly. He was staring at the screens with the expression of someone whose entire world was falling apart. Professor, she called out. He did not hear her over the noise of frightened students. Professor Villani, she called louder. This time he looked at her, his yellow eyes focusing slowly. Miss Lee, what are you doing here? Students should be in their emergency positions. Professor, you said something once about recognizing patterns. I think I know what is happening. Professor Villani looked around at the panicking students and the terrible news on the screens. Miss Lee, this is not the time for your human theories. Please. Professor, just listen for 1 minute. Something in her voice made him pay attention. The desperation in the room was so thick that even wild ideas seemed worth hearing. They have been watching us, Nari said quickly. The Devourers have been studying galactic military doctrine for decades. Every battle simulation you teach in class, every tactical formation we study, every strategic principle the Academy records. They know all of it. That is impossible. Our tactical database is secure. Not your database, Professor. Your lessons. Every great battle in galactic history, every victory that made species famous, the Devourers have been learning from those battles. They know exactly how each species fights because they have been watching you fight for centuries. Professor Villani's expression changed slowly from dismissal to understanding to horror. You mean they have been studying us, like we study historical battles? Yes, and now they are using everything they learned. When Admiral Thek used Vorthak formations, the Devourers already knew how to counter them because they had studied every Vorthak victory in history. The screens around them continued showing the destruction of fleet after fleet. Each military force was using their species' traditional tactics, and each one was being destroyed by enemies who seemed to know exactly what they would do. If you are right, Professor Villani said slowly, then every tactical advantage we possess is worthless. They know our strategies better than we do. Not every strategy, Nari said quietly. Professor Villani looked at her with new attention. What do you mean? They have studied every advanced species in the galaxy. They know how the Vorthak fight, how the Nexari fight, how the Kalani fight. But Professor, what species have they never bothered to study? Understanding dawned in Professor Villani's eyes. Humans. We were not part of galactic civilization until recently. Our tactics, our strategies, our way of thinking. The Devourers have never seen any of it because everyone considered us too primitive to study. A new report flashed on the screens. The Nexari homeworld was under attack. The beautiful energy, beings were using their most advanced technology, but the Devourers were countering every move with perfect precision. Miss Lee, Professor Villani said urgently, if humans have military tactics the Devourers have never seen, then your species might be our only hope. That is what I have been trying to tell Earth, but they need time to prepare. Human fleets are small and our ships are not as advanced as alien technology. Then how can humans possibly fight an enemy that has defeated our best forces? Before Nari could answer, another alarm sounded throughout the station. This one was different, deeper, and more urgent. All personnel, this is Commander Thek Morandi. Long-range sensors have detected a Devourer fleet approaching this sector. Estimated arrival time is 48 hours. All non-essential personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately. Panic filled the hall as students realized the enemy was coming to the Academy itself, the most important center of galactic learning. was about to become a battlefield. Professor Villani grabbed Nari's arm. "Miss Lee, you must contact your people on Earth. Tell them what we have discussed. If human tactics are truly unknown to the Devourers, then humanity must lead the counterattack." "Professor, even if Earth sends every ship we have, it will not be enough. The Devourer fleets are massive, and our technology is centuries behind theirs." "Then we need something other than traditional warfare," Professor Villani said desperately. "We need tactics so unusual, so unexpected, that even beings who have studied warfare for centuries cannot predict them." Nari looked around the panicking crowd of alien students. These beings represented the most advanced military thinking in the galaxy, but their advantages had become weaknesses. Their sophisticated strategies were too predictable. "Professor, what if the answer is not more advanced tactics but simpler ones? What if we fight in ways so basic, so primitive, that a highly advanced enemy cannot understand them?" Professor Villani stared at her. "You want us to fight like primitives?" "I want us to fight like humans," Nari replied. "Sometimes the most sophisticated enemy can be defeated by someone who does not follow any of the rules they expect." Around them, students were rushing to evacuation shuttles. The Great Galactic Academy was emptying as the most brilliant minds in the galaxy fled from an enemy they could not understand. But in the middle of the chaos, a Vorthak professor and a human student stood together, planning something that had never been tried in galactic warfare, using primitive tactics to defeat an advanced enemy. "Miss Lee," Professor Villani said quietly, "I believe I owe you an apology. For the first time in my teaching career, the student in the last row may know something that the front rows do not." Nari smiled grimly as evacuation alarms echoed around them. "Professor, I think it is time for humans to show the galaxy what we learned during all those centuries when we were fighting each other instead of studying alien battles." The Devourers were coming, armed with the knowledge of every advanced civilization in the galaxy. But they were about to meet the one species they had never bothered to understand, the primitive humans who had been sitting quietly in the last row, learning everyone else's secrets while keeping their own. The evacuation of Station Kepler 7 was nearly complete when the human fleet arrived. Nari watched from the observation deck as 20 Earth ships dropped out of hyperspace. They looked small and crude compared to the elegant alien vessels she had grown used to, but something about their formation made her heart beat faster with hope. The lead ship was the Soul, commanded by Admiral Yoon Ji-won. Nari had studied Admiral Yoon's career at the military academy on Earth. She was known for unconventional tactics and for winning battles that everyone expected her to lose. Professor Villani stood beside Nari at the observation window. Most other students and faculty had already evacuated, but he had chosen to stay behind. "Your ships look very different from ours," he observed. "Human ships are built for different kinds of warfare," Nari explained. "Alien ships are designed to win clean, organized battles. Human ships are designed to survive messy, chaotic fights." The human fleet spread out in a pattern that looked random to alien eyes. There was no elegant formation, no mathematical precision. The ships moved independently, each one following its own course while somehow still working together. Admiral Yoon's voice came over the communication system. "This is Admiral Yoon of the Earth Fleet. We are here to assist in the defense of this sector." Commander Thek Marandi, the insectoid military leader coordinating the evacuation, responded immediately. "Admiral Yoon, our tactical analysis shows that traditional defensive strategies are useless against the Devourers. They anticipate every standard military response." "That is why we are not using standard tactics," Admiral Yoon replied. "We are implementing what humans call the Chaos Doctrine." Nari had never heard that term before, but it sounded very human. 3 hours later, Nari found herself in the Academy's command center, which had been converted into a war room. Massive screens showed the positions of both the human fleet and the approaching Devourer ships. Admiral Yoon was there in person, having shuttled over from her flagship. Admiral Yoon was shorter than most aliens but carried herself with quiet confidence. Her dark eyes missed nothing as she studied the tactical displays. When she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. The enemy will arrive in 6 hours, she announced to the mixed group of human and alien officers. Their fleet consists of 47 ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything we have. In traditional warfare, we would lose within minutes. Commander Thek clicked his mandibles nervously. Then what do you propose, Admiral? We are going to confuse them, Admiral Yoon replied simply. She gestured to the display, and the screen showed a new tactical formation. The human ships were arranged in a pattern that looked completely chaotic. Some ships were grouped together. Others flew alone. Some were moving toward the enemy. Others were moving away. There was no apparent logic to their positions. This formation violates every principle of space combat, Commander Thek observed. Exactly, Admiral Yoon smiled. The Devourers have studied galactic military doctrine for decades. They know how fleets should behave, how commanders should think, how battles should develop. We are going to do everything wrong on purpose. Professor Villani leaned forward. Admiral, how can deliberately bad tactics defeat an advanced enemy? Professor, imagine you have studied chess for 100 years. You know every possible opening, every classic strategy, every master game in history. Then someone sits down across from you and starts moving pieces in ways that make no sense. What happens? You would be confused, Professor Villani admitted, and while you are trying to figure out what they are doing, they might checkmate you in 3 moves using a strategy you never learned because no chess master would ever use it. Nari understood immediately. You're going to fight like humans have always fought, unpredictably. Exactly, Miss Lee. Humans learned warfare by fighting each other for thousands of years. We never had the luxury of studying our enemies for decades before fighting them. We learned to adapt quickly, to improvise, to do whatever worked even if it looked stupid to outside observers. The command center filled with activity as officers prepared for battle. Kim Hyun, the intelligence agent who had been sending Nari encrypted messages, arrived with a team of specialists. Admiral, we have completed our analysis of Devourer tactics, Kim Hyun reported. They are indeed using modified versions of every major galactic military strategy. Their computer systems contain detailed files on Vorthak patience, Nixari technology integration, Kalani group coordination, and Gorvek aggressive assault patterns. What about human tactics? Admiral Yoon asked. Their database contains almost nothing about human military doctrine. A few scattered reports about primitive tribal warfare, but nothing about modern human strategy. Perfect. Then they have no idea what we are about to do. Admiral Yoon turned to address the entire command center. The key to this battle is not to win through superior firepower or advanced technology. The key is to make the enemy doubt everything they think they know about warfare. She pointed to the tactical display. When the Devourers arrive, they will expect us to form defensive lines or attempt coordinated attacks. Instead, our ships will act independently. Each captain will use their own judgment to engage the enemy however they see fit. Commander Thek's compound eyes widened in horror. That will create complete chaos on the battlefield. Yes, it will, and chaos is something the Devourers have never learned to handle. 2 hours before the enemy arrival, Admiral Yoon implemented the most unusual part of her plan. She sent Park Min-ho, a human diplomat, toward the approaching Devourer fleet in a small shuttle. Park Min-ho will pretend to defect to the enemy side, Admiral Yoon explained to the confused alien officers. He will offer to give them information about human tactics. But Admiral, if they capture him, they will learn our strategies, Professor Villani protested. Professor, Park Min-ho will not be captured. He will volunteer to join them. The Devourers are used to conquering species and absorbing their knowledge. They will want to download human military data from his mind. Nari suddenly understood the brilliant cruelty of the plan. But the information in his mind will not be real. Exactly. Kim Hyun and his team have filled Park Min-ho's memories with false information about human tactics, fake battle plans, imaginary strategies, contradictory doctrines that make no sense. When the Devourers try to use this information, it will confuse their analysis systems. The Devourer fleet arrived exactly on schedule. Their 47 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls absorbing the light from nearby stars. They moved with the mechanical precision of beings who had conquered dozens of civilizations. "They are scanning our positions," reported a human technician. "Their computers are analyzing our formation and trying to predict our tactics." Admiral Yoon watched calmly as the enemy ships approached. "Let them analyze. They will not find any patterns because there are no patterns to find." On the display screen, Nari could see Park Min-ho's shuttle approaching the Devourer flagship. "Admiral, what if they do not accept his defection?" "They will accept it," Admiral Yoon replied confidently. "The Devourers believe they are superior to all other species. They think any intelligent being should want to join the winning side." Sure enough, the Devourer flagship captured Park Min-ho's shuttle with a tractor beam. Within minutes, alien technology was downloading the false memories from his mind while he pretended to cooperate eagerly. "Now we wait," Admiral Yoon said quietly. 20 minutes later, the Devourer fleet began to behave strangely. Their perfect formation started to waver as different ships received conflicting tactical information. Some ships moved to counter imaginary human strategies, while others tried to implement the false doctrines they had absorbed from Park Min-ho's mind. "The enemy formation is becoming disorganized," reported Commander Thek with amazement. "That is our signal to attack," Admiral Yoon announced. "All ships implement independent engagement protocols. Remember, there are no rules except victory." The human fleet erupted into motion, but not in any way that made sense to alien observers. Some ships charged directly at the enemy while others retreated. Some fought alone while others grouped together randomly. Some used conventional weapons while others improvised completely new tactics. The Devourers, trying to respond to 20 different strategies at once while their computers struggled to process contradictory tactical data, found themselves unable to coordinate their counterattack. "It is working," Professor Villani breathed. "Their technological advantage means nothing if they cannot predict what to defend against." Nari watched as human ships darted between the much larger Devourer vessels like insects attacking giants. The enemy had superior firepower and stronger shields, but they could not hit targets that refused to follow predictable flight patterns. "Admiral," she called out, "the Devourer flagship is trying to escape. They want to retreat and analyze what went wrong." Admiral Yoon smiled grimly. "Not today. All ships pursue and harass. Do not let them regroup or withdraw. Keep them confused until they surrender or are destroyed." The battle continued for 3 hours, but it was unlike any space combat in galactic history. Instead of elegant formations and mathematical precision, it was controlled chaos where human unpredictability defeated alien superiority. When the last Devourer ship was disabled, 6 months after the Battle of Station Kepler-7, Nari walked into the same classroom where she had once been relegated to the last row. But everything was different now. The empty front rows that had once been reserved for superior species were gone. Instead, desks were arranged in mixed groups where students of different species sat together. A young Vorthak named Kel sat next to a Nexari energy being called Light of Dawn, both of them working together on a tactical problem. Behind them, 2 Kalani students were discussing strategy with a group of humans who had arrived as part of the new exchange program. The room buzzed with conversation in a dozen languages as students shared ideas that would have been impossible before the war. Professor Villani stood at the front of the class, but he was not alone. Nari walked up to join him at the instructor's podium. She still felt nervous about teaching, but the past months had shown that humans had much to contribute to galactic military education. "Welcome to Advanced Strategic Studies," Professor Villani announced to the mixed class of students. "Today we will continue our analysis of unconventional warfare tactics, with particular focus on the importance of adaptability in combat situations." A Gorvek student raised his furry hand. "Professor, why do we need to study unconventional tactics when traditional strategies have worked for centuries?" Professor Villani looked at Nari, indicating she should answer this question. She stepped forward, no longer afraid to speak in front of alien students. "Because the universe changes," Nari replied. "The tactics that worked against one enemy might fail completely against a different enemy. The Devourers proved that being predictable, even if your tactics are perfect, can be more dangerous than being chaotic. She gestured to the display screen, which showed a simulation of the recent battle. When everyone fights the same way, it becomes easy for enemies to prepare counters to your strategies. But when you fight in unexpected ways, even inferior technology can defeat superior forces. Light of Dawn, the Nexari student, glowed brighter with interest. But Miss Lee, how do we teach unpredictability? If we make it into a formal doctrine, does it not become predictable again? It was an excellent question, the kind that would have been dismissed if asked by a human student just months before. Now every student's ideas were taken seriously, regardless of their species. You raise a good point, Nari acknowledged. The answer is that we do not teach specific unpredictable tactics. Instead, we teach flexibility of thinking. We teach students to adapt quickly when their plans fail, to improvise solutions to unexpected problems, and to question whether traditional approaches are always the best approaches. Professor Villani nodded approvingly. Miss Lee is correct. The goal is not to make warfare more chaotic for its own sake. The goal is to develop military leaders who can think creatively under pressure. A human student named Wan Jisoo raised her hand. Professors, what about coordination between different species fleets? How do we maintain unity of command while encouraging independent thinking? This was one of the new challenges facing galactic military forces. Human tactics had proven effective, but they needed to be integrated with the existing strengths of other species. That brings us to today's main lesson, Professor Villani replied. We will examine the Battle of the Outer Spiral, where Admiral Yoon successfully combined human unpredictability with Vorthak patience and Kalani coordination. The display showed a recent engagement where a combined fleet had defeated a group of pirates who had been using stolen Devourer technology. The battle plan looked complex but flexible, with each species contributing their natural strengths while remaining ready to adapt to changing conditions. Notice how the Vorthak ships provided stable defensive positions, Nari explained, while human ships conducted rapid harassment attacks, and Kalani swarms coordinated precise strikes on key targets. No single species could have won this battle alone, but together they created a strategy the enemy could not predict or counter. As the lesson continued, Nari found herself walking around the classroom instead of standing in one place. It was a habit she had developed from her time sitting in the back row, when she had to move to see the displays clearly. Now she realized that moving around helped her connect with all the students instead of just those in front. After class, Professor Villani and Nari walked together toward the faculty offices. The corridors were busy with students and teachers from dozens of species, all working together on projects that would have been impossible during the old system of species hierarchy. Nari, Professor Villani said, using her first name as he had started doing after the battle. I have been thinking about something you said during your first week here. What was that, Professor? You asked about supply lines during the Battle of Vorthak Prime. At the time, I dismissed your question as too simple for advanced strategic thinking. But I have been reviewing that battle, and I realized your question revealed something important that I had never considered. They stopped walking, and Professor Villani turned to face her directly. The enemy in that battle did not lose because of superior Vorthak psychology. They lost because their supply lines were overextended, and they were forced to attack before they were ready. Your human perspective saw a practical problem that everyone else had missed because we were focused on the elegant strategic elements. Naria thought back to that embarrassing moment in her first class. Professor, I was just trying to understand how the battle worked. I did not mean to challenge your analysis. But you did challenge it, and you were right to do so. That is exactly what I should have encouraged instead of dismissing. Professor Villani's yellow eyes showed something Nari had never seen before. Regret. I spent so many years teaching students to think like me that I forgot the value of students who think differently. They resumed walking toward the faculty meeting that would decide the academy's new curriculum. Representatives from every major species would be there, planning how to train the next generation of military leaders. Professor, Nari said carefully, do you think the galaxy really learned from what happened with the Devourers? Or will we eventually fall back into the old ways of thinking? That is the challenge we face every day, Professor Villani replied. It is easy to value diversity when you are facing an existential threat. It is harder to maintain that openness during peacetime, when old prejudices seem less dangerous. They entered the conference room where the curriculum meeting was being held. Admiral Yoon was there representing Earth, along with military leaders from every major civilization. The room that once would have been arranged by species hierarchy now had everyone sitting in a large circle where each voice carried equal weight. "The question before us today," announced Commander Thek, "is how to structure our military education to prevent future devourer-type threats, while maintaining the tactical advantages we discovered during the recent conflict." Admiral Yoon spoke. "First, the key is to institutionalize independent thinking without losing the benefits of coordination and planning. We need officers who can follow orders when necessary, but who can also improvise when circumstances change." A Nexari representative glowed thoughtfully. "Our energy manipulation techniques work best when combined with other species approaches. We propose joint training programs where students learn to integrate different tactical philosophies." "The hive mind agrees," clicked a Kalani commander. "Individual creativity combined with group coordination creates possibilities that neither approach can achieve alone." As the discussion continued, Nari found herself thinking about how much had changed since that first day when she sat alone in the last row. The Academy had not just changed its seating arrangements, it had fundamentally changed its understanding of what made a good military leader. "I would like to propose something," Nari said when there was a pause in the conversation. All eyes turned to her, but now she felt confident rather than nervous. "What if we eliminate permanent seating in all classes? What if students rotated through different positions and worked with different partners throughout each semester?" Admiral Yoon smiled. "Go on, Nari." The problem with the old system was not just that some species were placed in front and others in back. The problem was that everyone stayed in the same position, thinking the same thoughts, surrounded by others who approached problems the same way. If we keep moving people around, everyone learns to see situations from multiple perspectives. Professor Villani nodded enthusiastically. It would force students to communicate across species barriers and to explain their ideas in ways that others can understand. More importantly, added Commander Thek, it would ensure that no one becomes too comfortable with any single approach to warfare. Comfort breeds predictability, and predictability creates vulnerability. The proposal was adopted, unanimously. Within a year, the rotating classroom system had spread throughout the Academy and then to military training facilities across the galaxy. 3 years after the Battle of Station Kepler 7, Nari stood in the same classroom giving her final lecture. As a visiting instructor, she would be returning to Earth soon to help establish similar programs at human military academies. But she wanted to leave the students with one last important lesson. "When I first came to this academy," she told the mixed group of students,